For the avatar of Cornelius Coffey, we only had a couple of images to go by. The first challenge was to create a spline cage that approximated the shape of his face and head. Here I'm laying out spline rows and connecting them, adjusting their settings to create this spline cage for the surface. Once done with that spline cage, a surface can then be applied to it, as I'm doing here, and the amount of detail on the model can then be adjusted, as high or as low as we want. To make the most of today's game engines, a normal map has to be created. This requires both a high-resolution and low-resolution model for the avatar. After both models are completed, mapping coordinates are applied to the low-resolution model. Here you can see the mapping coordinates of the head and also the mapping coordinates of the main body. This is where the textures will later be applied. Following this, a normal map is created. The normal map takes the high-resolution detail in the low-resolution model and burns the high-res detail onto the low-res model surface, making the low-res surface seem far more detailed and interesting than it truly is. A diffuse texture can then be created. For Mr. Coffey's diffuse texture, I took and cleaned up the picture of him taken in the Air Museum. It was then flipped and blended together, making it ready to apply to the model. Once the model and texture are done, it's ready for animation rigging. A skeleton is placed inside the character mesh, and weights are set to deform the mesh by way of the interior skeleton. As you can see, I'm adjusting the outer perimeter of these effect weights to make sure that it deforms correctly in the joints. And at that, we're ready for the animations to begin. Animations can now be created. A couple of quick rotation tests of the head and the arm shows that it does indeed deform correctly. And now that he's complete and animations are created beforehand, Mr. Coffey's model is ready for the game.
In this segment, we will give you a glimpse of the Tuskegee Airmen game currently in development and showcase both the development process and the proposed features of the game. The Tuskegee Airmen game is being built with our flagship product, Visual 3D. Visual 3D is a 3D graphics engine and visual design toolset which allows game designers to create their games visually rather than via programming. Here you see one of our game designers using Visual 3D to build a virtual version of the historical Harlem airport by dragging and dropping 3D models of P-51 Mustangs and actual airport buildings onto the scene. After they are placed on the scene, the game designer is able to position them in order to create a realistic recreation of the airport. We will now take you through the game and show you how we intend to create a realistic, fun, and educational game about the Tuskegee Airmen. A major objective of the Tuskegee Airmen game is to make the player feel as if they were actually in the World War II era. This is achieved by creating realistic virtual environments that model the look of the time period and make the user feel that they are actually part of it. This is achieved by including a wide range of scenery that one would have seen if they had lived in the period. For example, this young Tuskegee Airman is currently in a 1940s airport in which the construction of the buildings as well as several P-51 Mustangs clearly reflect the look of the period. In addition, the airman is also able to visit a diner, a common sight in the mid-20th century. Through assembling scenery common to the time period and allowing the user to interact with it, the game is able to immerse the player in the look and feel of the World War II era. Educating the player about the Tuskegee Airmen is a central objective of this game. Using this game, we are able to teach the player interactively about the history of the Tuskegee Airmen, their story, and multiple aspects of aviation. This is achieved by allowing the player to play through the stories of the real Tuskegee Airmen and experience firsthand the events that shaped Tuskegee history. Here you are seeing a young Tuskegee Airman approaching Cornelius Coffey, the first African American to hold a pilot license and a mechanic's license. In this dialogue, Cornelius Coffey states to the young airman that he'll teach him how to fly if the young airman helps him in his flight school. Mr. Coffey then proceeds to teach the airman the hands-on knowledge that he'll need to become a pilot. This provides an example of how the game gives the player the ability to learn interactively by playing through actual historical events. One of the main passions of the Tuskegee Airmen is the dream of flight. This game makes flight a central principle and puts the player in multiple situations in which they will get the opportunity to fly. These flight opportunities will guide players through foundational aeronautical principles and provide a solid education in the principles of flying and aviation. In addition, the game will also teach users about the real battles that the Tuskegee Airmen fought by recreating these battles and allowing the player to participate in them. By providing the user the ability to participate in flight training and real historical battles, the players will be provided with one of the most entertaining and realistic ways to learn about aviation and the history of the Tuskegee Airmen.